we find ourselves sort of at a weird time. There's players that move a lot. Coaches move a lot, players move a lot. So you've done that. Your resume shows movement. And now it's full circle, sort of, you're right back at West Virginia.
Yeah.
I've been talking about the word legacy a lot and what it means and how hard it is to know that you're writing one in the moment, especially as a player. But from your perspective as a coach, what has coming back here meant to the word legacy and like what it means for you and how it'll be defined years down the road?
You know, that's a fair question, but the honest answer, I really haven't thought about it much. I thought about it, you know, when at my opening press conference, because it made a big deal out of it, and Pat had his show there, and there were a lot of friends, and so it's kind of nostalgic, I guess. But ever since then, it's just been work, like what we got to do to win. And so I'm hoping that that we're able to have some success and maybe even do better than we did the first time here. And there's different challenges with that, but I'm smarter, I'm older, wiser, and probably a little more appreciative of where I'm at than maybe before. But at the same time, it's a job and it's a work and it's a labor of love. So I'm blessed to be back.
I went and I was watching live the day that they had I would call it a reintroductory press conference here for you. And there were a couple of questions that were respectful, but they were almost trying to get across, hey, what makes you think you can still win at a high level? Iterating that the game's fully changed in all this. And I loved how you answered it.
I'm not the same guy. You know, it's you know, if I expect my players and my coaches to get better every year and every day and every week, I got to do the same thing. I'm not the same coach I was 17, 18 years ago. I better be better, right? You know, I have my 30 years of experience, 28 years as a head coach's experience. It's not 1 year repeated 28 times. I'm going to be a better coach in a month than I am today. And I want the same thing out of our staff and out of our players. But we did have some success before. And I like to think that played a little small part maybe in this opportunity. But I also think a part was I got the job because of what we did at Jack State the last couple of years. We had a great place and we were able to win and probably had that program ahead of schedule. And so I think that if we'd lost to Jack State, I would have never got this opportunity. So the success I've had at some of the other places since my last time here has helped lead me back here. And I'm very, very grateful for that. I'm very, very appreciative of the opportunity. And they didn't bring me back for nostalgic reasons. They brought me back to hopefully win. And so every decision I'm making now in our program is based, does it help us win?
So at Jacksonville State, half the folks watching this think it's in the state of Florida, first off.
That's right. Yeah.
And so they certainly probably don't know the day-to-day like machinations of being the head coach at Jacksonville State. Right. So I remember in that press conference, they were almost saying, all right, yeah, you won at Jacksonville State, but. And they were alluding to this concept that, well, once you step up in competition level, the formula is all of a sudden different. Yeah. And it struck me because we had just done on our show, like the previous night, a segment about the current state of G5 football. And the current climate of the better job you do there, the more you get punished because the more your developed players leave and they filter up. And so, like, I would look at it, if I were you, I probably would have wrapped my press conference at that point because people would have gotten mad at me because I would have said, you know, could I offer an alternative point of view that it may be a little more challenging to win at those places in this day and age than it is when you have a little bit better resource. So you've lived that life very recently. What was it like on that frontier, being the head coach?
You know, and I lived that life, even though I played here and started my career here as a GA, you know, the base of what we do offensively and my philosophy as a head coach got formed at Glenville State College, right, which was an NAIA school, then a Division II school. And so that was the whole thing, like, okay, is this system's working in Division II? Will it work on Division I level? And I got an opportunity to do it at Tulane with Tommy Bowden and at Clemson, and it worked great there, and it worked great here. So the basis of what we do in our program, not just scheme-wise, but culturally, was started at Glenville State, West Virginia, a little small Division II school. So that argument of like, can you do it at a big school? You know, I've coached in the SEC, coached in the Big Ten, coached in the Big East back when the Big East was a little bit different, coached in the ACC. You know, we think we have a formula that knows how to win. It's still going to come down to having really good players that play really hard and having a staff that help them become better. That's not going to change whether you're in Division II, Division I AA, a Group of 5, or a Power 5 program. And our job is to what we did at Jack State was you know, we got a bunch of good players that played really hard, had a really good staff. The school was behind it, and it was a challenge because we were really moving up. You know, that transition is hard from 1AA to 1A. And, you know, we have some of the philosophies and the formula that we have there, we brought here. It's been the same formula we've had 20-some years, Josh. But the formula is not that complicated. You get really good players, put in a position to have success, work really hard, and you'll win.
Do you sometimes think when people lead into the way they talk about the sport with saying, man, so much has changed recently, I don't know that they're talking so much about like the X's and O's football piece as much as they're talking about all the ancillary stuff, talent acquisition. That world's totally different. Administratively, it's totally different.
That's different. You know what else is different? People have said, you know, can you coach guys now? Can you coach them hard? And, you know, I said the difference 25 years ago, you tell a kid to run through the wall, and he'll run through the wall and not have asked questions, right? Now they'll still do it, but they want to know why. If you don't give them the right answer, they'll Google it on their phones like, this ain't what it says here. And so they're smarter. So sometimes you can still get them to do what you want them to do, but you have to be more explanatory in nature. You got to tell them why. And you got to know what you're talking about. Players, I think good players want to be coached. But when you coach them, they got to see that you're making them better. That's the same thing the NFL's always done, is you get really talented grown men making millions of dollars, but they'll still listen to you coach if they know you can make them better or they know you can help extend their careers. And we're doing the same thing now. I mean, our guys are basically getting paid now, but they want to get better. And we owe it to them to coach. You know, some of my colleagues that have just throw their hands up and say, well, I can't coach these guys anymore. You're giving up on yourself and you're giving up on them. We're going to still coach. Our culture is still going to be the same. And I think our players want to be coached.
Do you find that the guys who still exhibit those characteristics, they stick out even more than they would have 20 years ago? 50 years ago, it seems like anyone that was in a football locker room by default, they just had that, or the way of the world back then would have filtered them out.
The number one problem, I think, in youth today is entitlement. You know, there's so much more entitlement, it seems like to me. And a lot of, I guess, older folks, maybe you call me an older folk, are just saying, golly, and they just complain about it instead of trying to correct it. You know, and that's what we try to do here. It's like, we don't want any sense of entitlement in our program, you know, from anybody. And we have a motto of earned success. So whatever success we're going to have, or they're going to have individually and us as a team, is going to be earned. And when you earn it, you get rewarded. And I think that's kind of the model that we have to adhere to. Like, you know, we're going to have all the things you got to have to win a national championship. We might not have the extra stuff that some of the programs have, but we're going to have enough. But what we got to have, what's non-negotiable, is the earned success model and the hard-edge mentality that we got to exhibit every day.
You don't doubt you can still pull that off, do you?
No, I wouldn't have come back if I didn't think we could win a national championship. I had a great situation at Jack State. I could have stayed there and finished my career. But I wanted to come back. It's home. You know, people that I care about, the school that I love, and you can win it all here. And there's always going to be challenges, but, you know, we have a lot of support. And when you do, and we do well here, and I know the state, of course, when you do well here, it is so neat to see everybody in the state come together, and that's kind of our goal.
You've talked about this before, but I'd love for you to talk about it with our audience, because a lot of them are in college. A lot of them have very little recollection of what 07, 08, like that era of West Virginia football, and at that time Big East football, what it was like.
Right.
And so, I mean, I want to take folks back for just a second. Like, this was one of the premier brands and premier programs in the country. This was a program that was fundamentally factoring into the national championship picture. Yeah. And you had Heisman Trophy caliber players here. And guys like Pat White, that had come from the state of Alabama, you end up developing into a world-class quarterback that was so good, you made the folks down in Alabama chastise their own programs. How come you didn't see this in this guy? How come you didn't offer this guy? But when you got to the point where you guys you had a different kind of wind in your sail for a while there. What was that ride to be on while it was happening? You
know, because I think we were right in the middle of it. I didn't probably see it from a national scope. I just saw it from within. And it was, I don't know, you're looking back, it was kind of magical, but the formula was still the same that we believe today. You find really good players that play really hard and care more about the team success and the individual success, even though the individual success was coming, and that's what we had. And it was something that, the whole state embraced. And we're such a small state, going 1.8 million people. So there's not a lot of Division 1A players every year. There's a handful, but not a bunch. So most of our roster is from somewhere else. And they collectively come in and buy into what West Virginia is about, blue-collar, hardworking, underdog type of mentality, and want to prove themselves all the time. One of the things that bothers me the most, Josh, I hear coaches or players say that, hey, I've already proven myself. I got nothing else to prove. Well, hell, if they're keeping score, no, we still got something to prove every day. And maybe we're wired a little bit different. To me, the next play in practice is the most important thing in the world to me at that point. And maybe we're all overly obsessed with that. But to me, that mentality of the next play, winning that play, I don't care what the hell we're playing either, what sport we're playing in. I could be playing you in pickleball. That next point in pickleball is going to be the most important thing in my life. And our players adopt that kind of philosophy. They did back in the early 2000s. And I think still today, players by nature are ultra competitive. They all love playing games. They all like being competitive. And we will appeal to that part of it when we build our program.
Do you believe you can find a guy that is wired the right way physically and put that mentality in them, or do you have to find the mentality?
You hope they have it naturally. Part of my job and our job is to grow that more, or to identify it when we recruit them, or to foster that for the first time if they don't have it. I think most of the guys that we try to recruit, we try to find, are they ultra competitive? Would they rip your heart out to get a first down? And will they do whatever it takes to have success? We try to identify that, but we also try to foster that with the way we do our program. And guys that are surrounded by other guys with that same mentality builds the winning locker room.
What is it like to watch a guy who he may have a germ of that in him when you evaluate him and you bring him in, but you toss him just into that chaos and you watch it slowly bubble, and then 3 years later, he is the guy that'll grab someone by the throat.
It makes me remind me, I won't say his name, but I used to think, I always heard this, if the puppy's not going to bite, if he doesn't bite when he's a puppy, he ain't going to bite when he's a dog. And I thought the same thing. And I had a freshman wide receiver, and we were, he was a little bit soft. He wouldn't stock block, and I'm thinking, this puppy's not going to bite. Do we make a mistake bringing him here? This and that. And then we went through spring practice, and we were on him hard because we thought he had some potential, but he just wouldn't bite, right? And all of a sudden, he flipped. Within a matter of 3 or 4 practices, he became the best stock blocker wide receiver I've ever had. And it changed my entire philosophy. And I told the coaches, I said, see, if you're surrounded a guy that has it in him somewhere, and you can foster that environment to get him to play with that hard edge and that competitiveness all the time, we might have something special. And that, to me, is what our program was filled of. I think, to me, I hope that's been the mark of our program every place I've been, whether it was here the first time or West Virginia, at Arizona, at Jack State, even at Michigan. We were there just a short period of time. We thought it was developing there by our 3rd year. So I've learned that. That was a lesson to me that, hey, some guys hopefully have it already naturally, but you can also foster that.
That's why I can't stand when people just use that fortune cookie logic of, well, people never change.
No,
people change all the time.
Sure they do, and I've we've all evolved. I've changed in not some base philosophy, but in some of the methods, because there are better ways to do things, right? If I expect all of our players to get better, I expect our coaches to get better. I've got to get better too. That's why there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about, okay, what can we do to help us or help me get better?
When someone asks you, hey man, what's West Virginia football? Or they say, man, you talk so glowingly about West Virginia football, the culture there. Well, what really sets it apart from any place else?
I've always thought, and I think even before I was here, I know it was that way when I played here, and certainly when we played here, that people could sit in the stands and they may not understand X's and O's or whatever, but they know if people are playing hard and playing with passion. That to me is who we've always been. Now, other programs say that, but there's different levels of playing hard. And I've told our players that's non-negotiable. If they're the 2 worst 4-letter, and I say way too many 4-letter words, right? But soft and lazy are the 2 worst. And that's unacceptable at any time in our program. If we're practicing or we're playing, if we ever exhibit softness or we're ever lazy, we have to correct it. Fire alarm's got to go off. We've got to do that. And you got to uphold that every play, every day in this program. This state understands that. The people in the state, the blue-collar, hardworking coal miners. My dad was a coal miner. My grandfather was a coal miner. Uncles were coal miners. I understand the kind of hard work they do. And these people in the state expect that and deserve that. And our program deserves that. And so I think our players, now it's kind of unique to see that culture take hold. They expect that out of each other and anybody new coming in as well. And what's funny is that sometimes the players' version, even some of the coaches' versions that haven't worked with me before of playing hard is different than mine. You might think, oh, that's playing really hard. I judge it at a higher scale than they do.
When you are interviewing people for staff positions, sometimes you've worked with them before, so you know who they are. But if you haven't worked, or if someone hasn't worked for you, if I haven't worked for you before and you want me maybe for your tailback coach's position, what's the process like of interviewing with you, not just to make sure I know ball, but to make sure I've got those innate characteristics. I'm speaking the same language as you when it comes to that.
And I don't want it, and that's a good point. I don't want clones. I tell my coaches, they got to be who they are. Their personality, how they coach. Like I'm kind of loud. I'm out there a little bit more. My son, who's a quarterback coach, is a different type of person. He's more quiet and more measured. I said, you got to coach to your own personality. Got to be who you are, as long as it has results. But understand this, I watch everybody. And that's because I love football. I watch every position. I don't call the defensive plays. I let Zach Alley do that. I still call the plays on offense. And I'll let my coaches coach. I don't want them not to have the empowerment to coach their guys. But when we watch film, we'll watch it all together, especially early when we're a new staff. So I can point out, see, this is what I think is loafing, just so you guys are all on the same page. And so I have to do my job of communicating exactly what I want. If I don't do my job of communicating, that's not the coach's fault, that's my fault. So especially the first year, there's a lot of extra communicating going on so I can clearly make it understood what our level of playing is.
You were talking about how your family comes from coal mining. Many families up here are like that. So I'm from a town in Georgia that was a mill town. So everyone before me, they worked in the mill, they worked in the textile industries. And then you look at, on the backs of that, the fact that someone like me gets to talk about football for a living. You come from a coal mining community. You get to coach football for a living, make a ton of money doing it, and have a blast at doing for a living what most people just do for a hobby, and they watch it on the weekends. Right. I know you're busy, man, but how often do you ever just have to pinch yourself, look in the mirror and say, are you serious?
Yeah, I have been blessed, and that's why, I'm obviously very grateful for this opportunity, but I'm grateful for all the opportunities I had throughout my career. I started off in a Salem College in West Virginia, a little, NAIA school, and I was the youngest head football coach in America, 24 years old at Salem College, 1988. I was the youngest fired in 1989 when they dropped football, because the school got purchased out by a private school. So I've kind of seen the whole journey a little bit from there, and it's maybe probably more grateful for the opportunities, but I've also think that I've tried to make the most of the opportunities. People know that follow us, and we work really hard. We put a lot of hours in, but it's, we have a little fun too. I like to laugh. I like to enjoy the experience. But we do work, and it's been a labor of love. And sometimes it's, you give up a few things you don't have as, you're a little bit more public, of course. And, when you go in the grocery store, because I like grocery shopping. I'm weird, right? So I like grocery shopping, but you can't grocery shop without folks stopping you and, hey, Coach, I don't know about them Twinkies. They ain't too good for you, But stuff like that. But I have a great appreciation to be able to sit right here talking with you, to be able to be the head coach at West Virginia for the second time. And if I want my players, like I said, my coaches to be appreciative, I'm the first one that is appreciative of the opportunities I've had.
I'm going to see if you have ever run afoul on this. When I go back home, I'm always really, really careful not to talk about how hard I work or how many hours or how far you travel, because man,
how hard are they doing?
That's absolutely right.
Afternoon shift in the coal mines, for 8 or 9 hours, and then come home and work in the garden for 4 or 5 hours. I've seen it firsthand, when my old man did it. So it's, coaches are, this one gets me, coaches complain about now, Josh, about the transfer portal and NIL and all this stuff. And, it bothers you because it's not fair and it's not in the competitive world like it should be, and they've got to fix it. But, man, have you ever been in a coal mine? Have you ever done some of the work that these folks do every day? And so I would hope that we, as coaches, we are a little bit more appreciative of be able to sit. Now, we've worked it. I didn't get this job by getting a winning lottery ticket. You know what I mean? We worked to get it, but there's a lot of folks doing a lot harder jobs than what we're doing.
One of the other aspects of a community like this, it's no different, in a different vein than the community I came from, is extremely prideful, and they take it personal when you leave.
Oh, yeah.
And
I know it.
Yeah. So you once upon a time, you had it all here.
Yeah.
You left. And full circle now, you came back. I know even recently when you came back, you had to deal with some people who still hadn't really gotten over the feelings and the bitterness. What's that interaction been like?
Yeah, it's been good. There's always a little bit of negativity. I think my press conference opened up with a little bit, one of the Pitt fans that snuck into the building or something.
And God bless them, of course.
But it's, you understand, maybe when they were upset, if they weren't upset, then maybe that would bother you.
Sure.
You know what I mean? But I think the timing of it all, certainly in being a local guy coming, and I had some different frustrations with where we wanted the program to keep going and all that. And I made a mistake leaving, but I also made a mistake probably not having a press conference to explain it all. But the apology tour is kind of over now. I've been here a couple of months, and everybody's been really, really positive. There's still probably a handful of folks that are upset because it left, and they come up with crazy conspiracy theories and some stuff that is absolutely ridiculous. They don't even bother responding to that deal. But the overwhelmingly amount of folks that I have seen and talked to over the last 4 or 5 months have been really great to hear about. I don't know if it's so much just me individually, of just that era or that type of success that we had and wanting to bring that back. I think that's more of it than anything. That, hey, Coach, we want to get back to where we're playing on national TV and winning championships and having a chance to win it all. And that's my goal too. So we're all aligned the same way.
The what if game is always the most fun game to play because no one can be right, no one can be wrong. So there are no losers. There are only participants. Right. I remember sitting, I was at the corner of Winton Road in Columbus, Georgia, listening to radio when the headline came down that you're about to take the Alabama job. And I think, man, Rodriguez has killed it at West Virginia. Man, how did Alabama pull that off? And then a few hours later, well, maybe not so fast. And then fast forward, Nick Saban takes a job. Everyone knows how that turns out.
Yeah.
And then you go on to Michigan, and everyone knows how that's turned out to this point. How big an inflection point is that moment in college football history? Like, think about the different paths we could have gone down.
Yeah, it was somebody did a story about that because obviously with Coach Saban's success, the greatest college football coach ever, not even question that, and how that thing kind of went full circle. And that's what I tell everybody. I said, remember, I didn't go to Alabama the year before, so it was. And it's some of the things that happened then that keep me here, came up later on too, 1 year later. But I always tell the story. So where's my trophy in Tuscaloosa, right?
There you go.
Where's my statue outside there? Because if I had gone there, you probably wouldn't have had those 6 national championships and all that. But it was, that's what's so interesting about my journey and how one decision can affect a whole lot of different programs. And, that's the sport we're in. That's the profession we're in. But I've also learned from that too, from that standpoint of every season I've had, every decision I've made in my coaching career, I've never really took time to reflect on it. And I probably say, when I retire, I'll reflect on it. But when there was a little bit of time in space in between, I think it was 2000, and it might have been after the Louisiana Monroe deal. When I was coached down there and coached my son down there, I had a month or two before I went there to okay, let's reflect on what this career has been and where I want to go forward with it. And I finally just said, let's not worry about the past. Let's be as good as we can be today, be better tomorrow, and then see where it takes us. And that's what led me here, I think.
You were talking a little while ago about how you hope you're a much different and better and smarter head coach now than you would have been 2007, let's say. If you drill down on specifics, like glaring areas where you circle, you go, I know I'm better there, I know I'm better here,
Yeah.
what would those be?
I don't know if I'm as different as maybe think I'm more advanced and better, more aware of certain issues, probably, because that back then I had some head coach experience at the small school level, but it was my first big school head coaching job. Now I've had 15 years of head coaching experience at bigger schools, whatever it is, since then. So I've got more experience doing that, leading bigger programs. I think that's where I'm better. I'm still too impatient. I've never had much patience, and I don't think that's ever changed. I'm still overly obsessed with every practice and every rep and every practice like I've been. So from that standpoint, I hadn't gotten better at. But I also think from a scheme standpoint and all that, I've had enough years. And every day I look at what people are doing. Not that I'm going to change our playbook, but I look at it, boy, that's pretty neat. How can we fit it into our program? But it's also outside of those things. How are my relationship with the players different now than they were back then? I think I've always had a great relationship with our players because the culture in the program has been where, one, they know they're going to work hard, but two, they're also going to be taken care of. And they care about something bigger than themselves. That's always been the culture, and that's the culture that we have now. And so from that standpoint, I'm kind of, the same in our demands. But from a standpoint of how you approach every, individual, how you coach every individual and all that, you've had to alter a little bit. But again, I bring it back, Josh, we still coach our guys. I think good players want to be coached, and they want us to make them better. And so we still do that.
What was the process like from the first time you got the inclination that coming back here could be in the cards to the time sign on the dotted line? How long was that, and what was that process like?
Yeah, people think these things go on for months. This goes on for days and sometimes hours. We were in the middle of playing for a conference championship at Jack State, and so my focus was on there. We had a Zoom call before, about a week or so before the championship game, and I think they Zoom called a bunch of people. It might have been 20 different people, because every AD has a list.
Sure.
But then the process, once it starts, goes pretty quickly. So we had a Zoom call, and then after the championship game, when we got a call about doing an in-person interview, then, okay, boy, now it's really serious. And they came down to our house in Alabama and did that interview. So when that happens, then it's real. Okay, it's not a 1 in 18 chance, it's a 1 in 3 or 4 chance. And I didn't have as many friends. My closest friends, some of my closest friends are all up here, wanting to make calls for me, whatever. I said, don't overburden them with that stuff. They know where I'm at. If there's some interest in all that, we'll see how it happens. And they still made some calls, but I don't think there wasn't like 50 of them calling every day and bugging our athletic director and all that. So, the interview process went well, and then the next thing you know, we got the call to come up here. And so I'm still very appreciative of the folks at Jack State, because I think, again, I wouldn't have got this opportunity had we not had some success at Jack State, and absolutely loved it there. But to come back and hopefully finish my career right here, winning a championship, and doing it in my home state is going to be pretty special.
When you first got back here, I don't know, had you been back here since?
No, I had not been to Morgantown in 17 years, I don't think.
So you come back, and anyone can imagine coming back home after they've been gone for a little while, but you also add on, you just happen to be the head football coach, and once upon a time you ran this place, and then you leave and you hadn't been back, and you walk back in. How did it strike you first? And secondly, what were the things you looked around and immediately said, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to add that?
Yeah, well, walked into the facility, and the base from the outside looked pretty similar. But my office was looking toward the parking lot. Now it looks over the stadium.
There you go.
$50 million has been put into the stadium with player development, a cafeteria, an academic center, all the things that every player needs for development, we have. We didn't have a brand new locker room. Some of the stuff I wanted to get done 17 years ago, they got done, 5 or 6 years ago. Maybe I had to leave for them to do it. There you go. Right? So, but they did a great job with it. The facility looks phenomenal, and so that part of it was in place. And then, a lot of the same folks that have worked at the university, worked in town here, we're still here. And so I'm trying to remember all their names, but there's such friendly people in the state of West Virginia, so passionate about West Virginia University and our football program and athletic programs. It was really neat to see that when I come back. And so I kind of soaked it in. It took an hour or two to kind of soak it in on the day of the press conference. And then it was immediately, okay, what we got to do to win. And so then you look at the roster, oh my gosh, we got a bunch of seniors that are starting there leaving. And then a handful of guys are probably going to go in the portal at that. And so the next thing you know, there's 2 guys remaining that started games for us. That's it. So we better get on our horse and get some recruits in. So it's been nonstop since then, just roster management. You're putting a system in during spring practice, which we thought that went well. Hiring a staff, a bunch of new coaches I thought were really good. So it's been pretty hectic.
When you take over a program, you always have probably a little Rolodex in your mind of assistants that you got on speed dial. I always know if I'm going to take this job, I'm going to hit him up. I'm going to hit him up. How many people end up on your staff or in an administrative capacity on your staff that you really never would have had on your radar a month prior?
Yeah, there was always a handful. Like there was a handful of guys that have been with me for a long, long time that understand exactly how we want to run our program, what we want to do. So that was good. I was able to bring a core group of guys with me that were with me at Jack State or had worked with me at other places. Maybe I had, like Zach Alley, he was with me at Jack State, then he went to Oklahoma. Well, I couldn't compete with Oklahoma when I was at Jack State, but when I'm at West Virginia, I could. So I was able to hire him, and he was a key piece. But, there was a good head strength coach here, Mike Joseph, that was already here who I knew of. But I also had Parker Whiteman, who was my head strength coach at Jack State. I wanted to have him as well. So I was able to hire both of them.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, it's really neat. So having the resources to get the guys that you really want to put together. And there's also a handful of new guys that a couple guys that we were going to hire left for other opportunities. And now I was able to hire really good guys that take their place. And so if you have enough resources, there's a lot of really good coaches out there. What I wanted to make sure I had was a mix of veterans, a couple older guys that kind of been there, done that, whether in my system or somebody else's that can recruit well, and then some young, hungry guys that want to get after it and recruit and coach guys up. And so that mix came together really well.
You've talked about your first time here and then the decision-making process behind leaving. You're just blunt about it. You say, yeah, I made a mistake when I left here first time. I don't think a lot of guys in your profession would be that honest. They'd know it internally, but they probably wouldn't be that honest about it.
And I say that, because it's easy to say, well, geez, because it didn't work out at Michigan. Right. I still think had we had one more year, it would have. Because the third year we went to a bowl game, and the fourth year they went to Sugar Bowl, and all the kids that were making all the plays, when they had that great year were kids that we recruited, we developed. So, I just think there was a lot of circumstance that happened. But I also think there was, I was, like I said, the worst thing I have is I don't have very much patience, and I was being impatient here because I was losing coaches, and we were playing for championships, and I probably could have sit back and said, hey, let's take some time and we can work it out here. So, obviously in hindsight it's easy, right? But it was a mistake, but it was, so very rarely do you get that chance to come back
right.
and finish it and make it right, so to speak.
But it makes you qualified, because there are going to be thousands of people who watch this or listen to this that in some walk of their life are in a sweet spot right now, but they don't know it because they're too busy being impatient or looking for what's around the bend. And a billion people have learned that lesson. You just end up being 1,000,000,001. Yeah. But now, do you find yourself, above and beyond being the head football coach at West Virginia, do you find yourself being in a position where if folks ask of you, you do have some pretty good advice. You do have some pretty good life lessons you can draw on to share with them.
Yeah, and I think there's, I hope more than just, to your point, more than just from an athletic standpoint or a coaching standpoint. It's a lot of people in life standpoint. They may feel kind of stuck where they're at or frustrated where they're at. And sometimes it's just communicating with more people or maybe trying to seek another avenue to make yourself happy. I always tell everybody it's kind of selfish, but my happiness is based on winning. If we're winning in football, I'm happy. If we're not, I'm miserable. And probably everybody around me is the same way, right? But and that is that the formula. that you have to have success? No. That just happens to be my formula. Or that's my life has been. You know, but it's been that way since I started playing Little League baseball in Granttown, West Virginia, or junior high basketball at Fairview Middle School. It's been like, if we win, I had a good day. If we lost, I had a miserable day. And that's never changed. I like to say, Josh, that it may change someday. I don't think it will. So we'll see.
Everyone who watches the sport right now, they're really curious about how when you take over a job, in the old school, you would just implement your recruiting strategy and you would tell everyone, suck it up, we may need to torch the barn and kill the rats and build it back up from scratch. But today, since you have the portal at your disposal, you could overturn a lot bigger chunk of a roster at one time. You could have 40 or 50 or 60 new kids in a program over the span of 12 months. That used to not be possible. But yet I would imagine, knowing you, that you still want to have the same bedrock developmental principles and evaluation principles, and let's build this thing through high school the way you always have, unless I'm wrong. And so how do you set expectation for yourself for what's possible year one? And what I'm trying to ask is, do you have to, in some cases, resist trying to just go out and grab everything you possibly can at the expense of doing it long-term the way you want to?
Yeah, I think there's no question the goalposts have moved. You got to move with it. You know, last year, Jack's Day, we had 60 new players, and we started off the season, you know, losing a couple games, but I thought we were going to be better as the season went along. We did. We wound up winning the conference. You know, this is the same way. We're going to have probably 70, 75 new players.
That's insane. That number
used
to take 2 or 3 years to do that.
Yeah, and so you're building the culture, you're building a system's got to happen on speed dial. You're speed dating now in recruiting. I mean, it's not, you don't have 2 or 3 years to build a relationship. You might have 2 or 3 days. You know, that's what's so crazy about it now. But if you want to win, you got to adapt to where it is. And our coaches all have to adapt. And you can complain about it all you want, and we still will. But it is what it is. And so what do we got to do to win? Every decision I make, right? It was based on, does it help us win? And so, but at the same time, you can't sacrifice your culture. And that's the hardest part today. Like in spring ball, you know, maybe your culture of what you expect your players to do, whatever, and maybe a guy's just upset and he's a starter and people are afraid that he's going to get in the portal. Well, you can't give in to him and have the culture for 100 other guys be set. And so that was the hard part of the spring. To our guys' credit, and a lot of them hadn't played much or whatever, I thought they really bought into what we were wanting them to do, or what the kind of atmosphere we wanted to coach in. And it was different. Every coach has their different way of doing things. And there's been, my way, or the way of we've done things, is not the only way to have success. That's just the way I know. Other guys have different ways to do it. And so I was hopeful at the end of spring that, gosh, I hope we don't have to also could start over again with our culture and start over again with a bunch of new players. We have to start over with some new players, but we found enough in the spring to buy into it that we think the culture was established. Now, does that mean we're going to win right away? I hope so, but we at least I think we're off to a great start so far.
You mentioned something a little while ago. I kind of wanted to come back to it. If you are a head coach in Texas or California or Georgia or whatnot, you could sit there and sell the concept of a California player or a Texas player or a Georgia player, knowing full well you could throw a rock outside your window and find 25 per cycle that are capable physically of playing for you in that state. That is not the case in West Virginia, but you still preach the values of what it means to be a West Virginia football player. But could you talk a little bit more about how that's a lot more about a bullet-pointed set of values and principles, and there could be a kid in Cody, Wyoming that reflects those, or Orlando, Florida, but it's about selling them to come here and hopefully finding enough per cycle that embody that a generation from now, when they look back, you don't really think Orlando or Wyoming. You just say, that's West Virginia kid.
Yeah, you could be from inner city Atlanta, or you could be from somewhere else and still adapt well to our program, our town, our state. This is a small state. We know the majority of our roster is going to be from out of state. That's what makes us kind of unique, and I think kind of special, is that you can be from somewhere else and come here, yet embody what the values of the state of West Virginia is about. And more importantly, embody what this program is all about. And I think that's something that having some of my former players on staff, or having some of the former players around, and our guys seeing the pride they have for this program, the pride they have from each other, and they're from all different places across the country. That's what helped us build a championship program the last time. That's what's going to help us build it now.
What is the thing maybe that you find you have to give up the most because of what this job demands of you? There's something else. Hey, in another life, I'd love to maybe do a little bit more of this, but it ain't in the
time.
cards.
It's free time. There's no question about it. It's free time. Like I can remember, I like to golf. I mean, used to have time. Now Jesus, do I even have one day a week or one day a month to golf? So pickleball you can play a lot faster. You can play that in an hour. Maybe that's why I've geared toward that a little bit more. But you're all everybody. But all coaches talk about sacrifices they make, right? But I mean, doesn't the coal miner make sacrifices? Doesn't that teacher make sacrifices? Doesn't that police officer make sacrifices every day? So hey, we ain't got it that bad. We got a pretty good gig. Maybe we don't have every weekend free. Maybe we have 2 weekends a year that are free total. We still got a pretty good gig.
What do you hope people say about you way on down the road when your history, your career has been written and books closed on it? Yeah, what do they want to say about you? What do you want them saying?
I hope they enjoy the experience. This sounds kind of Pollyannish. I said, one of my goals, obviously we want to win championships and players that have success individually and team-wise. But I hope in 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, if you ask them, would you do it all over at the same place with the same people, and they said yes, then I did my job. So I want them to enjoy the experience. I want them to enjoy each other and then have been better because they were in our program. Coaches say that all the time, but are they really better because they played for you and they were in your program, whether it's a coach or a player? If they say that, then I think I've done my job.
Coach, we appreciate it.
Appreciate you.